Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Lauren deLisa Coleman, and I am still inside of the Austin Film Festival. We're bringing you a bunch of different interviews during the Inside series here at film.io. And get ready, I have my next one. I don't know how it's going to go because these guys seem like off the chain, but I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I have the filmmakers with me right now in Austin, the filmmakers behind a film called My Dead Dad. I have Fabio Frey and Pedro Correa. Fabio is the co-writer and director, and Pedro is co-writer, lead, actor, producer. So, guys, please tell the audience a little bit about what My Dead Dad is about.
Yeah, so it's about a kid. He grew up with parents that were divorced, and his mom had moved away. So he basically only ever knew his mom other than a couple summers when he was very young with his father. And he's always kind of resented his father because he was under the impression his dad had no interest in him.
How'd he die?
And then he finds out one day in his early 20s, his life hasn't gone too well. And he doesn't really know what he's doing with his life. And then he finds out that his father died and left him a rundown apartment complex in Los Angeles in his will. And it's now his responsibility to go take care of it. And it forces him to kind of confront his resentment and anger towards his father. And through the tenants that lived in the building and knew his father a lot better than he did, he gains a new perspective on who his father was. And he eventually learns to A, grow up in his own personal life, and B, to let go of that resentment, and he finds a sort of peace. So that's basically the story from beginning to end.
Yeah, I think that was
very entertaining.
Yes.
But it's definitely a coming of age story. And I don't know, there may be other films out there that I'm not aware of. I'm not the world's biggest movie buff. Like, I'm not one of those people that's watched every single movie, but we just thought it was very interesting. Like, how do you tell about a character if they're already dead? We just felt like we had never really seen that before. And it was kind of one of the challenges, but also one of the things I think made this film kind of unique.
I think that's a really great synopsis. It's funny because, I talk to many filmmakers, and sometimes they, I guess when you're too close to it, it's your baby. You can't really describe it very well, but I think that was really good. I'm curious though about how you guys got together. I was like teasing them off camera about how, it's like a total balance. One's light, dark, one's like, I think they're both kind of crazy, but one's maybe crazy or the other one's a more balanced. But you guys, you just seem like a fun, cool duo. Tell me about how you kind of first got together, at least on this project.
We met in the desert up in Lancaster, California during a meth deal.
Yeah, it was difficult because
see what I mean, you guys? I told you we didn't know how this was going to go.
No.
Right?
Honestly, we met through enough. I'm from South Carolina originally, and I moved out to LA with a friend of mine. My background up until now, in terms of what I've made, has mostly been comedy, but I've always loved more dramatic stuff. And Pedro's more been in the drama world, but he just kind of, to have some variation in his life, was doing a class at the Groundlings Improv Comedy School in LA. And then him and my friend met there, and they just kind of hit it off. And then we just kind of became like friends, And then it wasn't until about 2 or 3 years later that the seed of this story came about. And, Pedro and I have both been in that boat where I think that we like all different kinds of movies, but we've always liked stuff that's a bit serious. Had up until that point been kind of young guys and didn't really feel ready to tackle something like that. But then the timing just kind of lined up and it felt right to do it on this one. And now I feel like that's kind of where we're headed.
Mm-hmm. So how did you actually come up though with this particular concept, or did you start with something else and it kind of evolved into this? I mean, I know you said you were interested in exploring storytelling around someone who was deceased, but how did it actually turn into this shape?
Yeah, well, it's funny because the story is largely based on something that that happened to Pedro, but we didn't even start talking about that. Like we hadn't seen each other in a while. And then I went over to his new apartment and he was telling me about his goofy landlord. And I've had nothing but weird landlords in LA myself. And we were just kind of joking.
They're all weird. When I lived in LA only for a year, and mine was like,
yeah, it always seems like the least possible qualified people end up being landlords.
I remember my okay, so I remember a specific event where this started everything. My thermostat was broken. My gas heater in the apartment broke. My landlord comes over. He's like, no problem. I'll fix it. It's all good. I come back to my house. The thermometer or the thermostat's gone, and it's just a light switch. And I was like, is there a light in here or whatever?
Yeah,
no, it's just
his landlord was so cheap that he replaced the thermostat that like turns it on at certain temperatures with just an on and off switch. So it's either like blazing hot or off.
Yeah, 0 to 100.
Not that
that's one definition of fix. Maybe not the standard, but
we were just joking around about how it's always like the least qualified people that become landlords, at least in Los Angeles. And then I was like, wouldn't it be funny if like a young guy who had no business running an apartment building inherited one? And then Pedro was like, well, it's a funny story because something similar happened to me.
Yeah, when I was like about 14, I hadn't heard from my dad in a super long time after my parents divorced. He was living in Peru at the time. I was living across the world. And one day he called me and was like, hey, what if I have lung cancer and I'm going to die? And,
oh my gosh.
And yeah, I was shocked to hear his voice, let alone like that he was going to die, and also that he owned an apartment. I knew nothing about any of that. And it was like, your name's going to be on it and you're going to have to manage it. And I was 14 at the time. Like I can't, manage anything in my life, let alone an apartment. So luckily in real life though, he survived the lung cancer, and he had lung surgically removed, one of them. I didn't even know you could survive like that. And we sort of reconnected a little bit when I was more of an adult. But there's a lot of real things in the script that from both of our lives that kind of interwoven themselves into the story that made it in the final cut. So, yeah.
So what was it like, actually making this? Challenging, fun, crazy. Well, I know it had to be a little bit crazy with you two guys, but aside from that.
It was a lot of crazy for sure.
Which is a good thing, because I always say, like, it doesn't matter if it's hell to make a movie. If the audience can't tell, then that's all that matters, But it was definitely very challenging. It was it was very ambitious for the budget we had, and we had a lot of different locations. We had a company move, which, as you are probably familiar with, but maybe not all viewers, is like when you have to move the whole crew to another location. We had at least one every day, and some days we had 2 company moves, which it just eats up a lot of time. And also we had locations that we needed for the next day that fell through. And then our locations manager, who ended up being like a total stud, he would always find them at the last minute, but it was very nerve wracking. We had a lot of like legal gray areas, like the main apartment that we were shooting the interior for the dad's. So in the story, the dad dies, he leaves his son the building, and the only free room is the room where the dad lived in the building. So the son is kind of very viscerally forced to be around all his father's belongings. But so the apartment where we were doing that interior for, we had permission in writing from the person who was renting the apartment, but we didn't have written permission. We didn't hear yes or no from the actual building. So we were in this horrible gray area where it was like at any moment a neighbor could complain and the building could send in the police, like worst case scenario. And we had some pretty decent known actors on it, like Raymond Cruz, people who cost like $7,000 or $10,000 a day. And it's like, if we get shut down right now, like we can't literally afford to get him for another day for reshoots. And so the whole movie was extremely stressful. I got shingles really badly on the second week.
Seriously?
Yeah. And like,
but like
we were both only sleeping.
Like that's why I was like, wait, did he really or not? Because
yeah, no,
like
all in my armpit, that lymph node area. And then like, we were both, not getting a lot of sleep because we were so involved you know, on the practical side, that we would wrap at like 8 or 9 and then have to go home and like get stuff ready for the next day till 1 a.m. And,
right.
Yeah.
But it was very tough, to be honest, you know, and like there was for sure like some fun moments, but overall it was like very much a marathon. And but you know, I've heard
what would you do,
you know, moving
what would you do differently having like lived through this? And so, you know, if you had to do it again, or when you do it again, and for, you know, tips for like you guys watching, you know, how can you overcome something like that? I mean, a lot of it's just out of your control, but some of it isn't. So what would you do if you had like more budget or whatever?
It's so tricky because it's like, if we had more of a budget, I think we would hire more experienced ADs. We didn't really have a singular assistant director on it. I think we would hire more experienced line producers. You know, Tara Ansley came on during the production, which was super helpful, but we needed like 2 or 3 instead of, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, when you're shooting 40 locations and like 50 actors, it's like another ballpark. I mean, even Marvel movies, go look at the IMDb, there's like, you know, 20 actors on a lot of them, you know, at most. And it's just a lot to juggle for sure. But on your first feature, I mean, I think the most important thing is don't get caught in analysis paralysis, where it's like, you know, everyone knows that guy trying to make a movie that never does because they're trying to get the perfect situation.
Yeah.
You know,
you have to embrace the imperfection on the first one. Like, so I guess there's 2 questions here. One is, what would you do differently? And I would say nothing, because that your circumstances aren't going to be ideal on your first feature. No one believes in you, you know, doesn't matter how many good shorts you have, you're kind of a very unknown entity. And, and then a different question is, what would we do different on the next one? And I think now that we have one in the can, and it turned out obviously pretty good to get into the Austin Film Festival amongst many others, I think now we kind of have that calling card, that proof that we are worth working with, you know, and we can get more experienced people to work with us on the next one. But I mean, our crew was like, I'd say the average age in the room, if you averaged everyone out, was like 25, maybe 28. You know, it was a very young crew from top to bottom. And so that gave us like the energy and the optimism, but not the experience, you know?
Right,
so,
right.
A lot of things. And then, I mean, it was just, we knew it was going to be tough going in. The hardest thing was just like not running out of steam. Like, cause like the first week is like kind of fun. And you're like, oh man, we got 4 more weeks.
Right.
So But one thing though is like, if you have a great 1-room script, that's awesome. But like, we just in our heart didn't want to do that typical first feature that's like 3 locations, and it's really obvious that they shot in 3 locations because they had to, not because that's what the story called for. You know, there are some really amazing like 1-room features, but typically they're plays first before they get adapted, you know? So they lend to that. Whereas I know a lot of people that made their first feature and it just felt like very low budget, you know? Like our goal was to make something for, I think our total shooting budget was $350K, but we wanted it to feel like 800 or $1 million. And like, I think we succeeded in that. And a big part of that was the many locations, you know? So it doesn't feel like a low budget thing.
Yeah. I mean, looking at it, you wouldn't know that. Like now, you know, all the backstory that I'm getting, you would not really think of that.
And that's the thing, right? Is like, if the audience doesn't know how hard it was to make, then you did the magic trick properly. Yeah.
Right. So I want to ask you guys now something else, which I don't really typically ask many filmmakers, but I, you know, just kind of feel like asking you guys, especially being there, like boots on the ground at Austin. Why, or do you feel that festivals are still, you know, very important, especially being there, you know, in person? And what do you think kind of the future might be of film festivals?
I mean, I think the most important part of it is honestly meeting people you'll end up working with down the road. I mean, Fabio and I both, we like a range of things from classic movies to more like kind of mumblecore indies. But to be completely honest, a lot of like festival films, like that's not like totally our, like what we spend a lot of time watching, you know? But when you find the right crew, you know, out there who's like actually doing it and and wants to make the same thing as you, that's like a beautiful thing, you know?
Yeah. So yeah, I would say there's two reasons in my mind. One is like you might meet someone who could change your life. You know, it's the same way like you might go to a festival for a week and only meet one good person out of it, but that one person might become the creative partnership that totally like defines your next film or whatever you're into, you know? So in that regard, it's like a low risk, high reward kind of thing, right? Where it's like at the worst, you got drunk a couple nights and ate some good food. And at best you meet someone who changes your life. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then I think for me, as well as a director, it's like the festivals are important because there's definitely like an undeniable difference with watching something communally versus sending people a Vimeo link or having it on streaming. And when you hear the audience like kind of all collectively like laughing at a certain moment or being shocked by a certain moment, it's just different. And it's like at the end of the day, you make a movie and you do it from the heart and you get people to give feedback on the script and you get your friends to give feedback on the edit. But that's like the ultimate litmus test is like, is a bunch of strangers who don't care about you at all and aren't going to pat you on the back, are they going to connect with your film?
Right.
And like, it's not really until it plays that you ever know for sure, you know? So I think that, you know, for those of us who can't afford to do like a screener the way that studios do, where they pay people to come in and watch something and give notes, like that's kind of what it is for more low budget filmmakers.
Which is sometimes not the best thing anyway. I just happened to catch like, I don't know, something about Die Hard a couple of weeks ago. And they were talking about how poorly, you know, it tested at first and nobody liked the poster and blah, blah. And then, you know, but it blew up. They were like, well, we don't have time to like do any extra stuff. We're just going to put this out and oh, well, you know, too bad. And, you know, we all know the history of Die Hard. So sometimes it's not a bad thing to not necessarily have the budget and the strategy of the majors, because they are very oftentimes wrong too, right? So you got to go with what you know or what you think. At least you own it that way.
And I'd say like more as for the whole industry, I feel like film festivals are important because the streamers and the majors, they've become over time safer and safer and safer. Yeah. And film festivals are an opportunity for movies, and a lot of them like honestly fail, but they take chances, you know? And I've seen films at the festivals I've been to that I didn't really like. I thought, well, but I'm glad that they tried, you know what I mean? Like, it's like they tried something that was hard. In my opinion, they didn't quite pull it off. But like, I appreciate watching people try interesting stuff, because I would say that most big budget stuff coming out nowadays is just like horribly predictable and like just not interesting. It's not really an art form. And on the other hand, I've been saying this for years, is like, I feel like what Hollywood used to do well is there's, you know, like the Venn diagram, like the two circles that overlap. Like Hollywood used to be really good at finding that overlap of entertainment and art. And it's kind of split to where it's like, now you have these movies that are basically just purely entertainment, like the Marvel films, you know, which is fine. And then you have movies that are purely art that, like, you know, like an oil rig worker in Oklahoma is never going to watch. And so the festivals have in a way become, like, in my opinion, too niche, where I feel like what we try to do with this film was there's something in it for someone who's like kind of less intellectual and just, you know, appreciates the visuals and like some of the plot elements. And there's something in it for really intellectual people. And the reality is most of us are a blend of both. So it's kind of for everyone, you know what I mean? And I think in a lot of ways, like, our film is like kind of the more, you know, normal or commercial kind of movie at a lot of the festivals we've gotten into. So we're really glad to have gotten in, because it's not that niche, you know. Now a lot of the festivals, it'll generally be a very niche topic, you know, or a very niche character background, but our film's a bit more general, which is cool to see that it even got into anything.
I think that's it's a pretty good point to make, very observant, and especially because, I mean, I'm talking to filmmakers pretty much every week. And yes, a lot of the films are very They're very pointed. It's very, very rare that you would just have some like kind of general, it's just a general love story, a general this or a general that. Not really. Not really.
Well, yeah, in a way, it's like almost harder to pull off the general thing, you know? Like the secondary story in our thing is kind of a classic love triangle, you know, storyline with Sophie, which has been done a million times, but it's harder to do that and then make it fresh and make it still feel inspired, you know, than if you do something super niche. It's kind of like cheating in a way where it's like, okay, there's like no other movie about that. So that's cool. But like in a way you have no competition, you know? So it's a double-edged sword where we almost accepted the challenge of like trying to do a pretty like age-old story, which is the coming of age story, and trying to do it in a way that was new and for our generation, you know?
Very cool. I think that that's a good point to kind of wrap up with. I mean, unless either of you or both of you would like to add anything, any, you know, tips for filmmakers watching or anything else, any, you know, kind of final thoughts that either of you both have?
Watch Dub Simmons.
Yeah, I have a million things. But my biggest thing is this, is like, filmmaking is innately a team sport. And if I hadn't met Pedro, we wouldn't be in this position. If Pedro hadn't met me, he wouldn't be in this exact position. And both of us had talent individually, but it's when we combined them that we really made something special, you know? And I find more and more, and it may just be a generational thing. We're both millennials. Pedro's closer to Gen Z and I'm a little, you know, but it's like people are so clingy and like not open to working, or they're difficult to work with, you know? Like I've tried many different partnerships and the one with Pedro has been the only like one that kind of stood the test of, you know, you're going to have some differences of opinion and whatever, and ego. But it's like, if you want to be clingy, go be a singer-songwriter or go be a painter like Basquiat, you know, who's behind you. It's like, you can do that by yourself. And those are art forms that lend themselves to individualistic expression. Whereas filmmaking is by its very nature a team sport. Even a low budget film is like, what, $100,000? Like you're probably, unless you come from a lot of money, not going to raise that all by yourself. And people need to really take a hard look at, like, it's unfortunate because of the way that directors get marketed nowadays. You have these star directors, like, you know, all these guys, but they have a team of 8-10 people behind them that they work with on almost every film who never get mentioned. And they're successful because of the team around them. But the marketing is always, oh, he's a genius, blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? And it's like, it's just not true. And so my biggest advice to other filmmakers is take a hard look at yourself and think about if you really want to play on a team sport, you know? And then if you do, those partnerships are worth their weight in gold. You need to like go through 4 or 5 people that it just doesn't really click chemistry wise before you find the person that is just easy to work with.
Yeah. And stop emailing and pick up the phone.
Yeah. And that's my other biggest advice. Like, so we're writing a new script right now. It's still in the outline phase, but we're about to start doing like hard pages pretty soon. But in the meantime, I was looking for other scripts and I was on Coverfly and all these, you know, websites for writers. You would be shocked by how many writers I'll read their script and I'll like it and I'm willing to like pay them for an option on it. And then like they have their cell phone number on there and I'll call and leave a voicemail and they never get back to me. And then I'll call again a week later. It's like, pick up your damn phone. Like, and that goes for everyone. Like there's been DPs I've wanted to work with. It's
agents, like, managers.
And maybe that's just a millennial thing, but it's like, you know, email is good for certain kind of transactions, but like you can get more done in a 20-minute phone call, like when it comes to all the specifics of writing or making a film, than you can like emailing back and forth for 3 weeks. And it's bizarre because a lot of people say they want it badly, but then when you call them, they don't pick up. And it's like, especially as you become more and more successful, you don't have the energy to like try to reach out to someone 3 weeks in a row. It's like, you may have, like, you know, you meet people all the time in the film industry, especially, but in arts entertainment in general, who are like, I'm just looking for my big chance. But the reality is it may have already come and gone. and you just didn't.
Well, I think it's really interesting to hear you say that, because even from my point of view, do you know how many filmmakers don't even have a landing page for their site? Or that you have to hunt them down through like a DM on Instagram, and like maybe they'll respond, maybe not, whatever. And you're just kind of like, you know, from the same point of view. Like, are you trying to win, or are you doing this like just for fun? If it's just for fun, like that's okay. But like you said, most times you would speak to people and they are into it. I just think that there's a lot of issue now more around just kind of focus and, I don't know, stamina or something like that around a project, around like your passion. And it just seems like if you get them at a good moment, you'll get a response. If you don't, then like you won't. And you can't, something has to like have some traction created, right? To be really successful. It's just like what we see in physics. Like it takes a minute for atoms to line up, and then they line up and do something. You got to get momentum going.
The thing is, it's like
always being on point, always on the hustle.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you enjoy it just as a hobby, then work when you're inspired. If you want it to become your full-time profession, you have to work on those days where you don't feel inspired at all, when you feel like shit, when you feel like, I mean, this project could have died at every stage. It could have died during writing. Like we raised some money, then we couldn't seem to raise any more for a while. And then all of a sudden it came through. And during shooting, there was definitely moments where no one would have blamed us for throwing in the towel. In editing, especially, it was like, you know, it kind of looked like we shot this right before COVID. It kind of looked like, it's like no one believed in us at certain points during editing, except for us too, you know, because people are flighty. Like when it seems like you're a winning racehorse, they'll put their chips on you. When it doesn't look like you're going to win anymore, people all of a sudden stop answering their phone. And we just kept persevering. It was like, you know, you have to work just as hard on those days when you feel terrible, you feel like no one loves you, you feel like it's not going to work out, and you got to get through those days in order to get to the winning, you know, stage. And here we are. And then even with the festivals, we applied to a bunch, we didn't get into a couple, and we just kept adjusting our strategy. And my other advice is like, you always have to be trying to learn new stuff or figure out a better way to do things. And that's, I think, why we've been successful up until now.
Yeah. And always mixing too, like, you know, the youth, whether it's youthful energy and kind of the old head who's been around forever. I mean, combining different equations of people is so important. You know, we've got many talented friends who we've worked with and who we haven't worked with on other things, you know, and it's like, I love working with friends, but that can't happen all the time either. You know what I mean? Yeah. And as you grow older, sometimes it's just like, damn, like you also need to work with people who are going to take this shit like seriously, like they're going to die on it, you know, like this is your job and this is your passion and everything, and just go for it, and they're going to be reliable because you don't have that much energy.
Yeah. I learned the hard way because our crew was so young that like, I thought it would work out if I was everyone's friend. But the thing is, people don't feel bad like showing up late to their friend's movie. And I realized maybe they needed to see me more as a boss, you know? So a lot of lessons learned, you know? But my biggest advice is like, to anyone out there, is like, a lot of times I meet people and they'll have an idea for a movie or even a script. And I'm like, okay, like, nothing happens for the first 20 pages, and they get all defensive. You know, it's like, are you making this just only to express yourself, or are you trying to make something that some total stranger halfway around the world can watch and enjoy? And it may be a niche audience, it may be a broad audience, but movie making is not for you, it's for other people watching. And it can be for both. But if you're trying to do an art form that's just purely expressing and bearing your soul, there's much better art forms, you know? So the biggest shift that I think has happened with Pedro and I is like, we now look for notes during writing, during editing, and
color.
You know what I mean? Like, so we knew that we weren't just making this movie to express ourselves. We were making this movie for people to like it, hopefully. And that has to be reflective in your process too, you know?
So these are some pretty deep insights from guys who just met on a meth deal. right?
Well, it's a lot.
Don't do meth.
The film business is harder than the meth business.
That's true. We haven't got anyone hooked on our films like that yet.
No, you're supposed to say the opposite, like 50, that the Hollywood, the film industry or television industry, entertainment, that's once you make it through, the drug business, that's nothing. So I don't know. No, but he said that he's actually said it's the same. You're still getting, killed. It's just some people use a pen and some people use a gun, right?
It's true.
Gun, you can't see what kind of stuff is being, written down or being left out or whatever. So, you just have to be on top of your game, whatever your game is.
Yeah,
totally.
That's gangster.
Yes. So guys, well, thank you so much. I'm going to let you go so you can, get out there and do all your strategy and whatnot at the festival. I hope things go well for you. And
thank you. We appreciate your time.
Especially with all of the work, that you put in, and you can see that, you're really into it. I can't wait till, I don't know when, so it'll be like, oh yeah, I interviewed those guys when they were like the Ben Affleck and Matt of the game, like back in the day, and now look at them like 2 years later or whatever, like they're doing their thing. So
yeah,
I love it. Well, thanks for taking the time.
Absolutely. All right, stay safe out there.
Thanks a lot. Have a good one.
Yeah.
Thanks, you too. And you guys, thanks so much for watching. This is, as always, Laura and deLisa Coleman for the Inside series right here on film.io. We'll be bringing you more interviews from the Austin Film Festival. Don't forget to tune in, and thank you so much for watching.